You are listening to Ministry Minded, a podcast of Step Up to Life, where we discuss the gospel, theology, and how to navigate the highs and lows of Christian ministry. Living out the Christian faith is a complex thing to navigate, so we're here to help you think through it as you progress on your journey.
Okay, so today what I wanted to do, I wanted to shift focus because we've been doing this podcast a little over a year. We've had a lot of different guests on, but what we haven't really talked about, although we've alluded to it, is the international scope of Step Up to Life. So I was curious today if you could take us through a little bit of the initial history as your dad branched out from the Midwest with Step Up to Life training, all over the world, really, in some various locations, and then how when you stepped in, you really ramped that up and accelerated that way beyond what he even maybe envisioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So to go kind of back to the very beginning, I was raised in Dad's churches, obviously. He couldn't go anywhere else, obviously. And it was the Christian Missionary Alliance. So the word missionary is right smack there in the middle of all of that. And so from a young age growing up, this whole thing of the nations, missions, unreached peoples, missionaries coming
Mm.
through our house, staying with us as I'm growing up, and we're having dinner. And I would rate the missionaries on who was the best based on who had the greatest snake stories. And
Okay.
for those poor guys that were urban missionaries, not a chance in my book. They got rated really low. The guys that had fought the pythons, those were the real missionaries, right?
the
So
the adventurers.
yes. And every year in the church, we would have a missions conference, which would be like a half
Mm.
a week with a big weekend emphasis or something. So growing up with that, very much part of my awareness and part of my understanding that this is Christianity. It's a global enterprise,
Mm.
that God is a global God. Red and yellow, black and white. We used to sing it, right? All are precious in his sight, the
Mm.
old Sunday school song. And then getting reports that we would be praying for the missionaries who were here and there around the world in that
Hmm.
denomination. So when Dad started Step Up to Life, which quick history, 68 years ago, he preached the sermon. Early 70s, it became a booklet, and so then churches in the U.S. began to want the booklet. And then some of the missionary contacts that my dad had literally around the world, they found out about it and they said, "Hey, like, can we translate this into Spanish?" And so, yeah, so it goes to Mexico. And can we, missionaries in France and Germany and different places, can we translate it into these languages? And Dad was like, "Yeah, absolutely. That's great." And so that's how the translation multiplication started.
Mm.
Just kind of word of mouth and Dad's background in missions. And so, and then occasionally he would travel to teach Step Up to Life in different places. I remember he went to South America a couple times, went to Europe, went to Nepal, went to India. Uh, and so that was just kind of the foundation of the international scope.
Mm.
Um, there wasn't, Nick, really a plan that they were working off of. It was just kind of he got an invitation to go somewhere or a request for a new language, and they would
Hmm.
do it. So,
Okay.
yeah, in Dad's time, and we'll kind of put that from 2000 to about 2014. The main emphasis was the multiplication of the languages that it was available in. And I
Hmm.
think it went
Okay.
from like one English up to 30 or 40, maybe 50 some
Mm.
during those years.
Wow.
And that was thrilling, of course. And then the occasional trips where he would connect with uh, pastors and leaders in Asia or Latin America
Mm.
or Europe. And then, of course, more requests came for more languages. And Dad he had this, what was it, kind of a mandatory uh, list of things that had to take place for a new translation. You had to have a champion for that translation.
Okay.
And you have to have a network for that. So you're not, translating it into a language that 30 people speak. It
Mm.
had to be kind of a broader scope. There had to be the funding, which back in the day, it was like $5,000 to $7,000 per new translation.
Okay.
And that would take care of the actual translator, the formatting of the booklet, the printing of,
Mm,
10, 20, 30,000 booklets, whatever.
okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of season one. That's kind of chapter one of how Step Up to Life started growing and going international.
But at this point, you're not directly involved yet, right? Like you're kind of you're connected with it. You probably use it. You're making use of it, but you're not necessarily spearheading it in any particular way.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Nick. So I was, let's see, we moved to Phoenix in 2000. So from 2000 to 2009, about half of that time, the second half, I was on the board. They brought me on the board. And so
Okay.
I was part of before Zoom existed. We had this, we had this little like microphone on the middle of the table here in Omaha. And
Oh,
I was
sure.
on my telephone in Phoenix, kind of being a part of the meeting. So
Conference call.
yeah, the old conference call. That's right. Um, and so I was on the board probably from '05 up until we moved back here in '09. We planted a church here in '09 and gave 5 years to that, still on the
Mm,
board, now attending in person. And then in 2014 is when I stepped away from the pastoral work and went full time with Step Up to Life. So
okay.
yes, to answer your question, I was very engaged along the way, uh, but obviously was not running the ministry. I
Sure.
told Dad when I finally took over, now finally, you're working for me. And we got a good
Nice.
laugh. We got a good laugh out of that. And Dad, he kept coming into the office into his mid 80s, late 80s, probably even like 90. I
Mm,
can't remember exactly, but yeah, he never actually really retired. So,
yeah, wow. But okay, so but also though, your dad was the founding pastor of Trinity Church, which used Step Up to Life as a primary evangelism method. But when you were there, you were at one time the missions pastor there, right? So when you
okay.
would take people
Yeah.
around the world, am I correct to understand that you would then, in the course of those trips, you would also bring Step Up to Life in tow with you?
Yes, thank you for that. I forgot about that. An important decade of my life. I forgot
Just a
about.
blip.
Yeah, how about that? Um, so so yeah, actually, when Trinity started, a group of 40 people started meeting, and actually they started the church. That didn't start the
Oh,
church.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's
they
right.
started
Yes,
the
yes.
church, and
Okay.
after a short time, they decided they needed a pastor, which of course churches need. And
Yeah.
so my dad was actually back in New England at that point. He had stepped away from his previous church and was just kind of waiting on the Lord. What's next?
Mm,
Whether it was Paris Reedhead Ministries or another church or whatever. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, this group started, and then after a while, they said, "Would you come back and pastor this church?" So he did that. And really, man, missions was a huge part of Trinity Church.
mm,
I think because of Dad's heart for missions and all those years in the Christian Missionary Alliance, where missions was very much emphasized.
mm.
Uh, and so, yeah, it was a huge part. In fact, members, if you became a member of the church, we used to do membership, taking in members in the Sunday night services. Remember that? Member churches actually used to have Sunday night service. And so they would come in and we'd welcome them and I'll do all that. And then Dad would give them a folder and tell them, "You are now a prayer missionary.
Ah,
This is part of the requirement if you're going to join our church." And they would get a folder that had all this information about a particular nation of the world with what God's doing in that nation. Also included was a map of the world that you could unfold,
mm.
uh, missionaries and ministries that are going on within that country to pray for. So missions was such a part of the church that if you wanted to join the church, you didn't have a choice. You became a prayer missionary. Uh, and then short-term missions. So I was in youth ministry at that time in the 80s, and I asked another youth pastor, "What's the best thing you do all year?" And he says, "Oh, work camp." I said, "What's that?" "Well, we load kids on the bus and we drive to some poor, poverty-stricken area and we work, rebuilding homes and cleaning and all that kind of stuff." So I started taking our youth to work camps in about 85. And then toward the end of the 80s, we did our first missions trip
Mm.
where we actually went somewhere. We went to, I believe, where did we go? We went to France for our
Oh,
first mission trip and worked with a missionary there that we had known for years. And
okay.
then so we went from one team. The next year we did two teams. The next year we did four teams,
Mm.
and all in the youth ministry. And then the switch came where Ty Schenzel took over the youth ministry, and I became the missions pastor through the in the 90s. And we continued to multiply short-term teams. And of course, Step Up to Life was one of the main tools that they would
Mm.
take with them on these mission trips. And so
Okay.
again, it's slowly trickling out, to the nations and to,
Right. Yeah.
um, yeah. So you're right. During the 90s, when I would go on these trips, we would always take it as a key outreach tool,
Hmm.
distribution, all kinds of good things with it. That's right.
Sure.
So yeah.
Sure.
So then it was probably 2010. My dad got introduced, and I'll spare the story unless you want to hear it, to a wonderful pastor and businessman in Nairobi, Kenya, named Jefferson Gathu.
Ah,
So
yes.
through that relationship, uh, Step Up a Life started going and growing in Africa.
Mm.
It was 2014 that I went over my first time to Africa. I think I've been there 4 or 5 times now to Kenya. But I went over there, I met Jefferson, we did some seminars and just started to network. Well, Jefferson told me, he said, Lincoln, I can get Step Up to Life into 20 nations in Africa. And I was like, really? I was a little skeptical. Oh, you have little faith. But he said between the church network that I'm a part of and the jail ministry that I'm a part of, we can get into 20 nations.
Mm.
And you know what? Here we are a few years later, and it's 25 at this point that we're influencing in Africa. And
Yeah.
more coming, more coming. We were just talking before we went live with the podcast. I think he's got two more guys lined up already that he is kind of grooming to become a Step Up to Life national champion in their country.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah, I'm talking a lot.
No. No,
But
that's a good scope because I think some people they're familiar with Step Up to Life. They're not quite as knowledgeable of how its global network kind of works.
yeah.
So Jefferson, of course, I've had the privilege of meeting him several times. Just an absolutely phenomenal man of God, totally gifted, and designed to do exactly what he's doing, and he does a phenomenal job. But yeah, he's been kind of a catalyst, I suppose, because
Well,
then when
yeah.
I came in, well, I came familiar with the ministry in 2016, but then came on board with you in the very end of 2022, early 2023. And since then, I've watched that catalyst gift that Jefferson has connect us then in ways to Asia that we weren't necessarily anticipating. And then, of course, there's this other connection through the Latin American side, which you might want to touch on too, that Jefferson
Yeah.
wasn't as directly connected with, but still helps out with a lot. So,
Well, right. And you know how God is the greatest networker ever. I mean, he knows how to connect people, right? And so here's the short story. Jefferson is invited to go to Thailand to teach Step Up to Life at an international prison ministry conference. Okay? So he's there teaching Step Up to Life. Well, there's a guy named Paul Tan from Singapore, and he's there as well. And he listens to it and he gets really excited about Step Up to Life. And he and Jefferson talk back and forth some over the next year. And then I can't remember if it was 1 year or 2 years, but Jefferson goes back again to teach. Paul Tan is there again. And now Paul absolutely grabs it. And
yeah.
he said, what you're doing in Africa, raising up these Step Up to Life reps or these trained champions in different countries in Africa, we can do that in Asia. And he's
Mm.
and he gets in touch with me and I don't know, I don't remember. I think it was 12. He goes, Lincoln, in one fell swoop, we can get Step Up Life into 12 Asian nations. Let's all get together. I know the leaders in these nations. They're vetted, they're men of God, they have proven ministries. And the next thing I know, I'm in Sri Lanka, just south of India, with like 12 or 13 men from 12 or 13 nations in Asia. And I'm looking at these guys going, how did this happen? What in the world am I
Yeah.
doing here? And
Right.
just like that, we were together for 4 days. We went through all of our materials, all of our seminar, website, everything, and really groomed these guys, raised them up to be qualified to teach. Let them teach some. We did some coaching, et cetera. You know how that goes. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so God, in one fell swoop, opened Asia to us. And I think it was 12. I think there's 12 men, two of them.
Hmm.
Well, we got two guys in India and we have two in Singapore. So maybe that's 9 nations or 10 nations, but
Hmm.
I think 12 champions. So
Yeah.
um, so yeah,
Yeah.
that's the Asia. You know how long it would, well, Nick, if we had just decided, let's
Oh
start
man.
looking at Asia. Do you know anybody in Asia? Well, I know this one guy in India. It would have taken us years
Yeah.
to get to 12 nations in Asia. But
Right.
God, in his sovereign, wonderful way, connected us with Paul Tan, who immediately connected us with these 12 guys. And
Yeah.
in one year,
Yeah.
we're in Asia.
It's phenomenal. Okay, so
Mhm.
now shift to Latin America. How did that connection take
Yeah.
place?
Yeah. Okay. So, wow. So there's a man named Chip Anderson who leads a ministry called Christ for the City. And I've known Chip for years and years. When we planted the church here, All Nations Church in Omaha, he was one of our elders. And before that, Chip and I knew each other through his ministry in Costa Rica and throughout Central and South America. Chip becomes the leader of that ministry. And my dad made some trips down there. I made a couple trips down there. I remember my first trip to Costa Rica was in, I think, 88 or 89 as a youth pastor. But just to see
Mm,
the work, see what was going on, and it was wonderful, absolutely
mm,
wonderful. So we start thinking about these geographic regions, Africa, Asia, and then I start thinking about Latin America. So probably 4 years ago, I sit down at breakfast with Chip and I say, Chip, look, here's what's going on in Africa. Here's what's going on in Asia. No, Asia hadn't happened yet. I'm sorry. Here's what's going on in Africa. Um, could we get into some of the other countries in Latin America? And he looked at me and he goes, Link, you have a vision for that? And he goes, yeah. And he said, tell me the vision and make it so big it scares me. I've never had anybody ask me to do that. And so I said, well, how about the biggest vision would be we get a hub coordinator somewhere in Latin America. Now, when we say Latin America, we're speaking of Central America, South America, and actually also Cuba and maybe some of the Caribbean. So
mm,
Spanish speaking world.
yeah.
And I said, okay, well, how about if we try to get a Step Up to Life presence on every one of your bases in Latin America, and they're in many countries, and a champion um, for each one of those countries in Latin America. And he
Mm.
goes, sounds great. What do you need next? And I said, well, you give me the priorities of these nations, and so I've been to I think every champion we have, 8 nations now. I've been to every one of them, except Bolivia, the new guy in
Mm,
Bolivia this year. Um, but yeah, so Chip opened with Christ for the City being his ministry. He opened the doorway to us in Latin America.
mm, mm.
So I leave Sunday in 3 days, 2 days, whatever, to
Right.
go down to Cuba, where we will be gathering together our 8 champions, or there'll be 8 of us total, 7 champions, for our first champion summit. We've done one in Asia, and we've done I think 3 now in Africa. So every 2 years we do this summit event where we bring them together, Asia, Africa, and now Latin America. So looking forward to being in Cuba. The reason
Mm.
we chose Cuba, some people roll their eyes like, what? Or raise their eyebrows. Had a couple this week do that to me. Can you even get there? I'm like, oh yeah, they love tourist money. But uh, I said we really couldn't get our Cuba guy out, so we're all going to him.
Hmm.
Uh, and this, I think, is my fourth time to Cuba, maybe fifth over the last
Okay.
6 years. So,
Yeah.
uh, and just a word on Cuba. Though it's an economic disaster, the church and believers are really doing well amidst incredible challenges
Mm,
economically.
mm.
Churches seem to be thriving, and these champions are just killing it. They are doing so great. I have my phone completely turned off. I thought, I don't know if you can hear the dinging, but I am doing my best to control this beast. Okay.
Yeah, I can.
All
It
right.
always does something. There's always
Okay.
something.
All right. I
Okay,
know, and you always
maybe
tell me,
explain briefly what a
yes.
champion is, because some people might be hearing you say that and going, "What is that?"
Good, good. Yeah, excellent. So, it's a champion is a trained representative. They represent Step Up to Life. They are not paid employees. All right, they have their own ministries, and they've already have a proven track record within those ministries, um, and they've been vetted by the hub coordinator. So Jefferson in Africa would not suggest a new guy unless he knows his work, knows his life, man of
Hmm.
integrity, etc. So it's wonderful for
Yeah.
us 'cause we don't have to vet these guys. It's already been done. So a champion is a person who's been through our training thoroughly, and
Hmm.
they are teaching our seminar wherever God opens doors. And often they are translating the booklet into new translations.
Hmm.
So in Africa, you might have like a particular nation, let's say they speak French, but within that nation, there are a number of tribal languages with large populations.
Right.
So you know a lot of these guys in Africa, they'll speak three, four, five
Oh,
languages.
oh yeah,
It's
it's amazing.
it is. So
Yeah.
I think right now there's 3 to 5 new languages that are needed in Africa. And these are languages spoken by thousands and thousands of people, even,
Hmm.
even maybe up to a million, often spreading over geopolitical borders. So you might have a group of people with a national border going right through them,
Mm.
but that's still the people group, and so they speak that language in two countries or three even. So so yeah, that's what a rep is, a champion. We call them champions. In Asia, they prefer national director, which is
Hmm.
fine. You want to give them a title that works best right in their geographic locations. National director carries a little more weight apparently in Asia when it comes to working with the government or getting permits or whatever you need to function.
Hmm.
Africa likes the word
Sure.
champion. Latin America is good with the word champion.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. No, it's good to kind of help people grasp the scope of this, because I think sometimes you think, oh yeah, it's an evangelism ministry, and it is, but it has a very strong international focus that sometimes is not always understood. So,
yeah. It's interesting because while our opportunities here in Omaha and in the Midwest and in the US, while those are increasing in a wonderful way, um, I would say by far the majority of what is being done
mm,
through Step Up to Life is not in the US.
yeah,
If you
right,
just if you just
right,
weighed out all the seminars and all the training and all the booklets and all of that, the major majority of it is just major majorities out of double whatever. The vast majority of it is international. It's
yeah,
going on in these continents of Africa and Asia and throughout Latin America.
right,
Um,
right.
so yeah, we're really we're really more of an international ministry than U.S. ministry. Although, as I said, wonderful opportunities with churches and ministries
Hmm.
in this region for ministry there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, well, I would like my church to maybe look into this, just get on the website, stubslife.com, because we are wanting to expand further into the US in terms of helping churches kind of incorporate this into their discipleship process. Often what we're finding is even people in baptism class or membership class need a way of talking about the gospel that's clear and efficient and winsome, but also respect where people are at in the midst of their journey. And so Step Up Life is really good with that. And so if that's something you're interested in, or you know a church leader who would want that, check out our stuff online, because we are pushing to expand that, especially over the next several years. That's going to be a main focus, a major focus for us.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but Link, your heartbeat in general is, I mean, you obviously you love the U.S. and you want everyone in the U.S. to hear the gospel and genuinely know Christ. But there seems to be something in your DNA, something God's burdened your heart with that is very missional outside of the country. Do you think that
Yeah.
had something to do? I've heard you mention when you were a kid on Sunday, you weren't really allowed to do anything. Maybe like a walk around the block, and you could read missionary biographies. Is that correct?
Oh man. Yeah, Dad before he passed away did confess that he was a bit legalistic when we were growing up. And so Sundays we could go outside for like 15 minutes and run around the block or something, but we couldn't play with our friends who were playing baseball in the lot.
Uh,
We couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. We just had to get out and get some fresh air, right? Well, it was Sunday, and Dad, was trying to honor the Sabbath, and I get that, right? It's okay. It was actually probably a good way to grow up. Um, but then, yeah, then it was like, okay, now we're going to get you this good missionary story to read or this missionary biography to read. And that continued on even into junior high. And I think someone into high school, he loved it. And I frankly, some of those stories are amazing.
mm,
Some of them were maybe a little dry for me as a kid. I
yeah.
remember one time back in the day when there were black and white TVs with three channels, right? And there was one football game on well, maybe one college game on Saturday and then one pro game on Sunday that they showed. So I'm
Okay.
downstairs supposed to be reading a missionary biography, but instead, what am I doing? No, I'm watching the NFL game. So then I hear the door open. Dad's coming down the steps. I quickly turn the TV off, sit down, open the book. Dad comes in. Oh, Dad, this book's just changing my life. My goodness, this is incredible. Well, Dad wasn't he wasn't dumb, and he looked at me and he looked at the TV and he went over and he put his hand on the back of the TV when they used to have tubes that would get hot and the TV's smoking hot in the back. Uh yeah, I got in some serious trouble that day for lying, for you name it. I broke probably three commandments all in one time.
Yeah.
Honoring
Oh
your
man.
parents. Anyway,
But
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 yes,
something happened though. Some of those stories must have
yes,
somehow got into your DNA because at that time you were very religious in a sense. You were very informed about God in terms of the data, but you weren't a Christian yet.
right.
And yet you're reading these stories, they are inspiring you, and somehow they got into your DNA.
Yeah, no, you're right, Nick. It was like God was planting seeds in my life, even when I was young and even as an unbeliever in junior high and high school, um, uh, for his heart for the nations.
Mm,
And the books, plus the missionary conferences each year, plus meeting missionaries and hearing their stories,
mm,
all of those things, those were just seeds going into my heart. And I can remember toward the end of my time as a youth pastor, God just blew up this global missions thing in my heart. And Trinity, the missions ministry was growing and growing. We were
mm.
adding new missionaries that we were supporting, orphanages, all kinds of different things. And it grew in the church to the point where it needed full-time oversight. It got to the
Ah,
point, Nick, we were giving $500,000 out of one church, $500,000 to missions each year. And
wow.
so, and we were supporting, I think, 35 different missionaries and works around the world.
Wow.
Um, and so it was a privilege in the 90s to be part of that growing edge in the church of a heart for
Hmm.
the nations and God's global heart.
Right.
Uh, and seeing God's word basically as the whole Bible is simply God's story of redeeming every tribe, tongue, people, and nation,
Mm,
so that everyone would be represented around the throne of God in the final day and throughout all
yeah.
eternity.
Wow.
And those
Wow.
scriptures and going to missions conferences out there and
Mm,
visiting the missionaries on the field and seeing the needs. I can remember going to some places and Mexico City, going to the largest poverty-stricken, what do you call it? The word won't come to my mind. Um, where all the poor people live. What do you
you
call
thinking
those?
of like a ghetto or something?
Yeah, kind of like this poverty-stricken ghetto. right on right on the dump, the huge dump where they would take all the garbage, and
Oh,
people lived right there, and they would go through the
okay.
garbage looking for things. And man, when you see that, going to Central Asia and seeing refugee camps
Mm,
with feeding programs and these poor people and family living in tents, plastic tents and things. And when you see a lot of that, God, if you have an open heart, God will change you. I mean, short-term missions, I think, is a tremendous thing for an American to get outside of themselves, to see some of the world, to see the need, and yeah, and I think Jesus, there's a pattern. What does it say? When Jesus looked at the multitudes, okay, so he had to, first of all, he
mhm.
saw them with his own eyes. Then what happened
Right.
next? His heart was moved with compassion. So there's
Hmm.
the seeing, there's the heart shifting towards God's compassion. And then what did he do? He fed them, he healed them. There was some kind of a mission overflow to the people that he was seeing. And in the United States,
Yeah.
there are certainly needy places in the US, and I'm all for outreaches in those areas too. But there's something about seeing need that
Hmm.
God can use to move our hearts with compassion that causes action that would not take place otherwise.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, all of that was taking place in my heart. The 90s, that
Mm,
decade of global missions pastor, man, that was just an awesome, awesome decade.
mm,
Been blessed to travel to over 40 nations and see the church in most of those nations, and to see about every different kind of government that exists today.
mm,
In all those nations, of course, I saw all kinds of governments, and some of them were wide open, and some of them were incredibly restrictive and dangerous for believers.
mm.
And again, all of that affects you, man. It's so all of that,
Right. Right.
you everything we do in life and ministry is two things. It's valid ministry in that day, obeying
Mm,
God, doing what He's called us to do, but it's also preparation for what God has next. And
mm,
as I look back on 45 years of ministry, I can just trace God's good hand of valid ministry in each season, but looking back, all of those were simply preparation for what I'm doing now.
mm.
And God's
Yeah.
good
Wow.
to train us up. Yeah, and I know
Yeah.
you could trace the exact same thing, though you're younger. You could still see that pattern, I'm sure, um,
Yeah.
up to this
Yeah.
point in your life.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is kind of funny because when I was a younger Christian, I mean, I'm young-ish, but younger, very young. I wanted the Lord to send me wherever. And in fact, I told him that. And every opportunity I ever had was always domestic. It just seemed
Yeah,
like
yeah.
time after time. In fact, I even had an opportunity to go to Greece on a missions trip when I was, I think I was about 16, 17. And an anonymous source funded it. But at the time, my parents weren't Christian
Uh,
and they weren't real keen on letting me go.
mm,
And there was a lot of tension there because they were religious in the sense that they weren't atheists, but they hadn't come to the saving faith of Jesus Christ, not in reality. And so to ingratiate myself to them, to demonstrate, to model to them that I wasn't just gonna go do what I wanted, I actually gave that up.
uh,
So it just seemed like every time, even when I had an all expense paid trip to go, I didn't go, which is so strange because I wanted to go. Seems like
yeah.
often the people who want to go can't, and the people who don't want to go get sent. I don't know, but
That's true. But
but
here's a great saying that relates to that. And I don't remember what great missionary said this, but they said, it's not crossing the sea that changes you. It's seeing the cross that
hmm,
changes you.
hmm,
So
yeah,
wherever we are, wherever we're
yeah.
called to go or not go, it's all about seeing the cross that changes us, not crossing some sea. Just because you sit on an airplane 8 hours doesn't mean you're going to be changed necessarily.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Although I will say there is something about getting out of your context that does put you in a unique place of maybe openness towards God in a way that's
Yeah,
hard to connect with when you're in your normal environment.
right.
Um, Maybe it's something about being more aware of your need. Maybe it's
Yeah,
something more about being in a situation where more you're forced to recognize how much control you don't have. Whereas in
Right.
your everyday life, maybe you're under the illusion that you have more control than you really do.
Yeah.
Um, and so you're maybe attuned
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
God in a way that sometimes at home is convenient or easy not to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yes, you're absolutely right. I think, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah. And another thing, I think, and I said this for years and years, I think I still believe it. But um, um, if you think about Jesus' um, discipleship plan for his followers, from the 70 on in, or
Mm,
72, whichever one you want to use, from that group of disciples on in down to the 12 to the 3 to the 1, all of them in part of their training under Jesus involved some kind of outreach. He sent
mm,
them out, right?
mm,
Sent them out two by two. They experienced something out there and came back and gave reports how it had
hmm.
changed their life. So
Sure,
some type of
sure.
outreach, if it's cross-cultural in some way, and maybe you'd go to like somewhere in Nebraska to a Native American reservation, or maybe to inner city, or some place that's different from where your life normally is.
Hmm.
Something about that I believe God would want for every Christian
Hmm.
sometime in their life, health permitting.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I do think it's fascinating. If you take, for instance, for example, you take Jonah and Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah is called to his own people. They won't listen to him. It does not go well. He's still faithful.
Yes.
It goes well in the sense that what God knew would happen happened. In fact, he tells them ahead of time, "Hey, they're not going to listen to you, but go." Okay. Um, Jonah doesn't want to go, and everyone listens. And it's cross cultural. He doesn't like these people. They're the enemies of the Jews. They've treated the Jews horribly, and of course, they all repent, sackcloth and ashes, and God redeems them all. But I do think there is something about cross cultural connections with the gospel in particular that does help us step out of our self focus. There's
Yeah.
something about that is really healthy, um, spiritually, but also just emotionally, in the sense of recognizing, hey, wait a minute. There are all kinds of cultures all over the world. God
Yes.
created these different cultures. In fact, even in Revelation, we read that the cultures and languages are retained. They're redeemed, but they're retained.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
So
The
it's
kings
not,
of the earth,
yeah.
what is it, Revelation 20 or something? The kings of the earth will bring the glory of their nation before the Lord. And so there is some kind of specific, identifiable national characteristic of
Hmm.
their nation, their whatever kingdom they were over, bringing that somehow to the Lord and for his glory.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, in
Yeah.
every language it says.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
even though God's the one who originally scrambled the languages in judgment, he then retains and redeems them because, of course, he's the one who made them to begin with.
Right. Right.
And that to me is it's really cool. It's a really beautiful picture. Of course, I've not done as much traveling as you, but when I am in a context where it's cross cultural, I hear a group of people gathered worshiping, and they're not worshiping in my native language. Sometimes those are some of my most worshipful moments,
It's powerful.
which is interesting because I can't even tell what they're saying.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I know in general what they're probably saying, they're
Yeah.
giving praise and
Yeah.
glory to God,
Right.
but there's something about it. I think that you're right. Every believer, especially when you combine that with the Great Commission, where Jesus is saying, "Hey, as you're going into the world, go and make disciples
Yeah.
um, of all people, of all
Yeah.
ethnic groups." And there is definitely something about that if a believer hasn't experienced it, I think they're really missing out.
Yeah. Well, and let me add this too. I think this is extremely important to throw into the conversation is that America has become this melting pot, and
Hmm.
there are people all over Omaha from all over the world. And
Sure.
so you don't need a passport, you don't need an airplane ticket, you just
No.
need to go across the street.
Yeah.
And so the opportunities here, and there are specific ministries that if you're out there and listening to this, if you're curious, we can put you in touch with specific ministries that are reaching out to the various nationalities and ethnicities that live in your city, really, wherever
Yeah.
you are. I'm thinking of Omaha, of course, but yeah, and then
Yeah.
there are ethnic churches in town, some of
Hmm.
them up to 1,000 people, made up of these expats who live here now, right?
Right.
Carving out their life here, fellowshipping and worshiping together, as well as those from other major religious blocs who are living here of a different
Hmm.
religion other than Christianity. And I heard a statistic a while back, Nick. I don't know if it's still true, but it was something, it was startling. It was something like 90 or 95% of people that come to the US to visit long term or to live here are never invited into an American's home.
Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. And
Wow.
I mean, the opportunity is all around us.
Yeah. Wow.
My wife and I were coming out of the bank about 3 months ago, and a guy was coming in, and he had on a shalwar kameez, which is the big baggy shirt that goes with the baggy pants underneath, and he had a big white beard, and I thought, I bet that guy's from Afghanistan. So, yeah, we didn't. I didn't know who he was. So he walks into the bank, and I say to him, "Assalamu alaikum, sangiye, jorde, chaye, tabeta khude." And he looked at me like, and we had just a delightful conversation. There was a there was another there was a gal at Hy-Vee at checkout. She was working the checkout, right? And she had a pretty name. It was unusual. I could tell it was from somewhere else. And I said, where is your family from? She said, Afghanistan. I said, really? I've
Hmm.
been there a number of times. She goes, oh
Okay.
yes. I said, oh, I love the kabli palau. It's this dish with the rice and the carrots and the raisins and the chicken or beef inside of it. And
Hmm. Hmm.
make that. You should come to our house. She invited me to where she's living with her parents down on Q Street to come and eat kabli palau. So we just got to get
Wow.
outside of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Start
Yeah.
conversations with people. It's amazing what can
Yeah.
happen. And
I mean,
so,
Jesus is interesting in that regard. It just seems like every other page in the Gospels, he's having dinner with somebody.
yes,
He's like,
right.
"Hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house for dinner.
Yes.
Let's go." You know.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So yeah,
true. And
there's
so
something about hospitality, connecting, having conversation, um, and especially with people that maybe you wouldn't normally think to do that with. That's very
yeah,
much what we see Jesus doing in the Gospels, and the impact that he had is, of course, undeniable.
yeah,
Um, but it does require a little bit of a what would you call it? A sense of got to own that a little bit. There's maybe a spiritual discipline and an act of faith there to kind of get out of your own self-focused uh,
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
mindset
yes.
and get your eyes up and look around.
Yeah, and to not let fear stop you. Here, crazy example. Uh, I'll leave the details out. Jen, my wife, fell, conked her head on the concrete. So
Mm.
we're in the ER. She's fine. She's fine. Just the biggest black eye I've ever seen. And people accuse me of punching her. I did not punch her. She fell down. And so in the room right next to us, they bring in a man from Nepal with his son. And so they're in the room right next to us, and I'm kind of observing what's going on there. They're hooking this guy up and all that stuff. And I was just hoping that the nurses would leave for a few minutes so I could just like step in and say, hey, how you guys doing? I've been to Kathmandu, Nepal. I've been to your capital. And if just that would have opened a wonderful door
Hmm.
to a conversation
Sure.
and just sharing and caring is like just start there. You don't
Right.
have to.
Yeah.
I don't know any Nepalese. I can't pull a few greetings out of my hat on that. But to just to care and share love with people, it's so important. And
Yeah.
then the nurse actually shut the door, so I never got to go in. But I was
Yeah.
planning to if she'd let me. So
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and you think, "Oh yeah, well you guys are outgoing and confident, you can do that and all this." Uh, well, that might be part of it, but actually your biggest ability to do this obviously first is just your faith, prayer. But secondly is just be naturally curious. Naturally
yes,
be curious, and curiosity will translate into confidence. Just ask good questions, be genuinely curious and prayerful. God will take it from there. Just be present and actually, as you said, Lincoln, actually care and actually take a interest and just see where the conversation goes. But of course, at that point, um, you might not be able to share anything about your faith, but you might. You never know.
Yeah.
And if you on the very off chance that you can, and you just don't know how to do that, of course, Step Up to Life is a great tool. So if you're not familiar with it, get online, stepuptolife.com, or obviously if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably familiar with it, but maybe share this with someone who expresses fear over this type of thing and just encourage them. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing, take them from totally against Jesus to
Right.
trusting him in over the course of 5 minutes or something.
Yeah.
But
But
so
that's
as
where
we
that's
landed,
like, I'm
yeah,
sorry,
go
the
ahead.
booklets, like the booklets that we have them in many languages.
Hmm.
And of course, in America, English, and then what's next? Probably Spanish.
Yeah,
Um,
probably.
and so, did I tell the story on a different podcast about the two guys who were putting in cable in my backyard or
Well, you've
fiber?
told me a couple times. I'm not sure if you mentioned it on the
Yeah.
podcast.
So they're Hispanic guys and they're putting in this cable for us in the backyard. And they're done and they're going out to their truck. And I ran and got two Spanish. I got a Spanish version of Step Up to Life. I thought this is perfect. So I ran up
Yeah,
to their truck as they were, getting ready to take off. And I started talking to them, and I don't know Spanish. I know a little bit of Spanish like most Americans, but I don't know much. But they spoke English, which was great. I said, "Hey, where are you guys from?" And I think they said Topeka, Kansas. And I'm like, okay, no, that's not what I meant. Where's your family from? Your family history. Oh, well, we're from
yeah,
Mexico. I said, oh, that's
yeah.
great. I've been there a good number of times. And then I just handed them the Spanish booklet.
Hmm.
And they said, what's this? And I said, well, it will help you figure out where you are in your relationship to God. And they, oh, thank you. And the guy in the passenger seat said, hey, are you a Christian? I'm like, yes. He goes, I am too. And then he said something like September 2017. I'm like,
Hmm.
nice. That's awesome. And so look, I first of all, I had a booklet. Okay, you can't give away what you don't have. So if you need some, let us know. I keep them in my cars. I keep them in my garage. I
Hmm.
keep them in my Franklin planner. I keep them in my triathlon bag. Just you got to have them to be able to give
Yeah,
them. And so who knows? Who knows where that went? I got a good sense that guy didn't know the Lord. He was probably going to be sharing the booklet with the driver
right.
as they were heading to
Yeah,
their next appointment. But who
exactly.
knows? We're just sowing seeds along the way, right? But we do
Yeah.
have it in a lot of different languages. And with all the different language groups that live in your city or in Omaha, let us know if you've befriended some of these folks and you'd like some materials in their language.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we land the plane? As you think back over these years, it's been what, 40 some years that you've been traveling
Yeah.
internationally. Anything stick out in particular that you just know, man, yeah, that God was at work there. It just stands out in my mind.
Well, okay, so God's a global God. He loves all people of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Um, and so if that's the global business that we're in, that means there are offices in every nation of the world. So we're part of this global enterprise, and our goal is simply to have the opportunity to share the core beliefs of our faith whenever doors open,
Yeah.
wherever they open. Whether you travel halfway across the world or you
Hmm.
walk across the street or the fence in your backyard to share with somebody over there. We've had friends over the years, we've had neighbors that are from countries in Africa, Southeast Asia. Um, and hey, it's great to make friends with folks like that. So, anyway, I would just say keep your radar up, always be ready, in season and out of season, and be friendly. Man, this day and age we live in America, you drive in the driveway and you put your garage door down, hoping that, nobody comes by or says anything. If somebody knocks on your door, you all hide behind chairs, like, hope they go away. I was growing up, you get the cookies and the coffee and you invite them in. So we've
Yeah.
lived, we're now in this
Yeah.
closed private culture, and we're afraid to talk to people or anything. And man, I love, and hey, I know every personality is different, right? But
Hmm.
I think being friendly and kind and caring is like the low bar for what the Lord would expect us to be like, right?
For sure. For
And
sure.
just that can open doors. Yeah.
Hey, I curious too, maybe share one or two prayer requests as you head to Cuba.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, leaving Sunday morning, get to Cuba Monday morning. And we got these seven champions from seven nations in Latin America. We'll be starting hopefully. Well, okay, so number one, pray that they all get there because it's been a logistical challenge with the seven different nations and the various requirements that those nations have to leave. Many of them don't fly to Havana, the capital, and so they have to go to a different country to fly out of that country to get there. And then when you do get there, you got to have your passport, your visa, and this special entrance form that I just printed out yesterday, and insurance to prove that hey, you have insurance. So there's just a lot of
Hmm.
stuff that
Sure.
has to all come together so that they're all there at the right time and we can have our good 3 days of meetings. And then for the meetings themselves, that these guys would really come
Yeah.
together and a real sense of team, step up to life Latin America team would form. And you've seen it
Sure.
happen in Africa.
Yeah.
It's really cool as that happens. And you see these guys loving on each other, praying for each other, taking a
Hmm.
real interest in each other's lives and ministries. It's really
Yeah.
fun. So the actual
Yeah.
meetings and the training, of course, we want to coach, have them teach it. We coach them as they're teaching it. Um, so yeah, I would just say logistics is big. Pray that we all get there on time. Whether we get out or not, that's up to God. But there was a great Youth with a Missions leader that once said, and this is back during the Cold War, he said, there's no country that I can't get you into. I might not be able to get you out, but I can get you in. So,
Oh man,
um,
that's
but anyway, no, we'll be fine. Cuba's really wide open and we'll have a great time. So thank you for your prayers for that.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think that's it for today. Will I see you again before you head out?
What's today? Wednesday? I don't know, Nick. I'm going to pick up all the stuff from the office that I need tomorrow.
Yeah,
And then kind of Friday and Saturday, really, I get down to planning out our time together. And so
sure.
we may not see each
Yeah,
other.
okay. Well, have a great trip. We'll be praying for you the whole way. Wanted to go with you. I
Next time.
probably could have pulled it off, but
Well, you've been a little busy knocking off your PhD work, so
oh my goodness, I have just very, very, very slight edits, but I'm basically done. And
that's
now, if
great.
I don't botch the defense, uh, I'm home free. All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will see you again in April on the podcast. Until then, God bless and take care.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
That's all for this episode of Ministry Minded. Thanks for listening. We hope you were encouraged and inspired to keep serving Jesus biblically as you follow him on your journey. If you appreciate this podcast, please subscribe, share it with your circle, and leave us a positive review. If you'd like to help us keep creating new episodes, you can do so with a tax-exempt donation online at stepuptolife.com/give.